Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Objective brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK. Today, I have a special guest host with me, one of my favorite peeps in the whole world. I love guest hosting with him and being a guest with him and partnering him with on pretty much any topic is always a very enlightening thing for me. Mr. James Valliant, it's great to see you. How are you?
Great to see you. I have to say the feeling is mutual, my friend. Very mutual. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm in the deep freeze in Pittsburgh at the moment,
Ugh.
but luckily housebound, so I don't really have to experience it too much, except when I take the poor dogs out.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, man. Dealing with that here. It's just rain here. It's not quite as cold, but
Yeah, I
well, what
feel
a
you.
great topic we have today.
Yes, folks, we're gonna be talking about a controversial topic today, but I want to make very clear exactly what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the trans movement. Okay, now we are making a distinction. I think both of us. I think I can speak for both of us in this case between the actual condition that I think a transitioning relieves and the movement, the political and ideological movement that people identify as trans. I think they're very different. They need to be dealt with differently. And we need to, I think, throw our support for those folks who find themselves in having the condition of gender or body dysphoria and dealing with it in the way in which transitioning is a therapeutic event for them, and those who have taken the mantle of trans to become a participant in this ideological and political movement, which I think has lots of twists and turns. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be thrown out there. The light of day needs to be shed onto it. And I think we as objectivists can add a unique perspective that I don't think is being dealt with out there in the real world. So, James, I know you have some pretty interesting opinions about this because we were talking about it before we came on. Shed some light on it from your perspective for me. This trans movement, talk about it. What is it?
Well, yeah, I think I'd pick up right where you left off. There's a distinction in my mind between someone with the condition of body dysphoria, someone who is transitioning or trans, and that medical issue. And it is a medical issue in my view. It's not a moral issue. As Ayn Rand said, psychological conditions are not a question of morality. They're outside the realm of morality. But I do regard it as a psychological pathology. If someone needs medication or surgery to correct a condition, I think it should be obvious on the face of it that that's a pathological condition. But just to suffer the severe body dysphoria, thinking that you're in the wrong kind of body and feeling that all the time is not a healthy state. Obviously, it's a pathological condition, but that identifying it as a psychological disease doesn't mean we can't be sympathetic. As I say, it's not a moral issue any more than any other psychological or emotional issue. I mean, we've all got psychological issues. And one of my very, very dear friends passed away last summer after a long battle with cancer. And I will use the pronoun he, was trans. And he opened up to me many years ago after some digging, and he was an objectivist too. Didn't interfere or bother our relationship at all. But the concept male or female, when we're little toddlers or babies and just learning the concept boy girl is probably how we would get the concept boy girl, male female. It's a very, very low level concept, very directly connected to the perceptual level. It's kind of like table or chair. It's a physical thing. Male, female, boy, girl, the metaphysics of it is physical. It's not about consciousness. It's not about some subtle relationship. It's a physical thing that's being identified. Maybe one step beyond, say, identifying humans or people. You identify boy versus girl. So there's a valid concept, and it relates to a physical thing. Epistemologically speaking, kids arrive at it right readily and from a direct perceptual, identification. Boys, girls, there's a physical difference. Those with that equipment, those with that equipment. The ones with beards over here, the ones with boobs over here. And it's a physical thing that we do. It's an objective concept. So I am willing to use a concept like he for someone who was born biologically she, if that is what makes them feel comfortable, if that is how they identify. I don't have a problem with that. So long, my friend had no ambiguity in his own mind. I'm a biological female. And so long as you've got that objectively squared out in your head, I have no problem calling a friend of mine, say, he who was born biologically female. On the other hand, it's this proliferation of all, and this is where we get into the movement thing, with all these pronouns, dozens and dozens of new pronouns that we have. And what are your pronouns, and what should I call you? Well, in my view, as an objectivist, those are all what Ayn Rand called anti-concepts, useless, rationally unusable terms, usually just ambiguous smears that smear out a valid concept, a previously valid concept. And in this case, male, female. A valid concept, male, female, is being substituted with an ambiguous smear of various pronouns, which I regard all of that as nonsense. If you're not suffering from severe body dysphoria, but you say, hey, call me by this, call me she-X or something. Why? What's the point? Maleness includes all the things that men can be. It has nothing to do with a psychological condition. You're a male, you're a female, and it's a physical thing.
Do you think the discussion about maleness and femaleness, which is, I think, the human identification of maleness and femaleness, is a worthy discussion to have? Because aside from the biological facts, which are perceptual level, a human's relationship to his own being is a complex phenomenon, right? So is there any validity to the concept of gender as a construct, meaning not just a social construct, but that there is validity to the idea that we learn maleness and femaleness from the outside? It's not, that it's a combination of psychological factors, learning things from other people, social input, a whole bunch of nuanced inputs that could go into making us understand the concept of maleness. Would you agree with that?
Oh, very much so. It's a very complex thing, and it does when you think about the concept, it's a lot broader than the physical, obviously. Masculine and feminine. And here the objectivist distinction is between the what Ayn Rand called the metaphysical and the man-made. Part of what we call masculinity is a sort of man-made, human-created institution. Let's say in one society, the men, when they reach a certain age of maturity, they pierce their ears. And if you don't pierce your ears, you are a sissy man. You are not part of our club. You better get your ears pierced to be a dude. Now, that's obviously a totally man-made construct, if you will. And so in that society, people would, there might be a group of females who think, no, I want to get my ears pierced too, because I really identify that way. All the reasons that make that person want to have their ears pierced because they're a dude, I have as well. So there is a man-made, socially constructed aspect, but is there a relationship between the two? I picked one perfectly arbitrary thing, pierced ears. Things like that change fashions from society to society, sure, and so forth. But I think there are characteristics that are objectively associated with the physical difference. I do. So
how do we parse that out? So I think a lot of what conservatives dislike is the overturning of gender roles. They like traditional roles between men and women. They think they're not just based in a long period of doing them. They're based, they think, in biological facts as what we're saying. But there are some gender roles that I think some in the trans movement think they're overturning for the better, right? The idea that there are some gender roles that could place women in a less dominant or less potentially powerful position that they seek to overturn. And in that respect, I think Rand was one of the first to demonstrate that, a woman could be anything she wanted to be, and that confining them to these gender roles that society claims, takes a claim on, or conservatives take a claim on, is not necessarily a proper identification for them.
I absolutely agree with that. Traditional ideas of machismo or femininity, or what Betty Friedan called the feminine mystique, may be totally intrinsic, religious, arbitrary, mystic in origin. No questions about that. Now, are there differences, though, that actually make a difference? The effect of our body chemistry is real. And there will be tendencies. I mean, they're the classic, we know the brains of men and women are different. The brains of men and women are different. Objectivism is obviously psychology and neurophysiology are specialized sciences, and objectivism has no position, takes no position on a psychological matter or a neurophysiological matter. But, they do the classic studies of toddlers. Little girls, and this is true across culture and across time, little girls, when playing, toddler girls, 3-year-olds, say 4-year-olds, playing together, will play face to face, as much looking at each other as they are into the activity that they're sharing. Little boys play side by side. Remarkable, but there's good science on this, and it seems to be a universal. So what are the differences that seem to be panning out? That's a scientific question. And I would really come down hard on that exact point. The objective part of masculinity and the objective part of femininity is a scientific question, a psychological question, it seems to me, and one that philosophy per se cannot answer. But surely the fact that the woman is penetrated and that the man is the penetrator in normal coitus has a psychological implication. The physical differences, having big shoulder muscles, being the taller one, those things will have differences. Now, what all that involves, I'm not a psychologist. I wouldn't pretend to know the science of this. Many of these characteristics are shared by both sexes, of course. Being aggressive and competitive, or being linear in your thinking, a no-nonsense kind of person. A woman can be that just as much as a guy can be that. Or a feminine, what do they call it? Empathy, nurturing, compassion, sensitivity, sentimentality, things we associate with femininity, at least in the stereotypical sense. A guy can have all those qualities too. And obviously it runs along a spectrum. They do those little online tests, and one of the better ones was tracking masculine qualities. Of course, they were hatching what they thought were masculine qualities in the questions, and feminine qualities. And so you could score both feminine. And so I was like, when I took the test, it was like I was in the 90-some percentile masculine, but I was also like almost 90% in the feminine qualities. I don't know what that makes me when it comes to traditional concepts that we associate with masculinity and femininity, but obviously both men and women have them. Everything, see, this is why those concepts, these pronouns mean nothing to me. Everything that a man can be is encompassed by the idea man. You can be gay, you can be straight, you can, be sentimental, or you can be cold and rational. Whatever you are associating male or female with, you see, is encompassed by already the concept male or female. Transgender is a condition in which a person says, no, I'm not happy the way I am. My body is wrong for me. I'm so unhappy with my body as it is. So we still only need those two concepts, he and she, it seems to me, to perfectly adequately deal with all the possibilities here. When we start inventing all these different pronouns, what's the referent reality? You're just whimsically saying, treat me like what? Treat me like, how about we all treat each other like individuals? How about we don't need a million pronouns because we've got billions of people?
But those million pronouns reflect the million emotions that are flowing through you. That's what it seems to be. It seems to be emotionalism on crack.
That's it. It is solid subjectivism through and through. It's an anti-concept.
I want to dig into this a little more. We got a couple super chats though. Catherine with $4.99, appreciating the Daily Objective. Thank you, Catherine, for your donation and appreciating us. Robert Nasir, a member for 9 months, says something that I completely agree with. I think you will as well. I hope we're not. We don't seem like we wouldn't agree with this. He says, I love gender roles, and they do have a basis in facts, a wide array of facts, but none of that means what the reactionaries think it means. Now, that's a very astute comment. You want to unpack that a little bit, because I agree with it.
Well, I think that he talks about liking gender roles. Let me start there. I have to say that when I am walking on the beach with my wife, and she leans into me for support, and I can be the strong one there, kind of supporting her in that way. It's going to strike a whole bunch of people who are listening to us, I'm sure, as totally sexist on both of our parts. But she gets a certain pleasure from being able to lean in on my strength. I get a certain pleasure from her leaning into my strength as the guy. I have to say, that's a real phenomenon, Robert, that it's an objective one in the sense that I absolutely know it. It's not that my wife can't take care of herself. It's just that when I'm around, she doesn't have to, is the way I like to put it. There's nothing non-objective about that. I am the bigger and the stronger. I want to be there to be the one to run the physical interference if she needs it. But I don't think less of her because I'm the one doing that. Quite the opposite. She's a value to me. If I weren't there, I bet she could probably handle, any 10 dudes, like that, because she's that tough. So yeah, I do believe that there is a pleasure to, and even transgenders, there has to be some meaning to masculinity and femininity. Otherwise, their identifications will make no sense either. Right? Why would someone born biologically female say, no, I want to be considered male, treated like a male. I want to act like I'm a male. What does acting like a male and treated like a male mean to you? You see?
To play devil's advocate, in some respects, I think women might consider, at least the feminist movement, I don't know about women in general, I can't speak for that, but would think that some of those gender roles confined women. They confine them to the weaker sex, quote unquote, and the dependent sex, infantilize them in a way that I think the original suffragette movement and women's rights movement in the 19th and early 20th centuries were trying to break away from.
Right.
But I wanted to identify with exactly what you said. My wife is fiercely independent, but I tell you what, she appreciates my physical presence. She appreciates being able to lean on me in the same way and likes it when I open the door for her, when I treat her like a quote unquote lady. She falls right into that. We fall right into that beautiful dance of male female. That who knows how much of it was we imbued from our culture, or how much of it just came to us naturally because of who we are. We got another super chat, Jeff Bannister for $20 Canadian, and Gail Parker for $4.99. Curious, do you think women's brains are constructed to pay more attention to detail than men's brains?
As I say, I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or a neurophysiologist, so I really can't. I'm not the one who can give you a decent answer on that. But from my reading of things, for example, the spatial sense that men have, and it may be connected to hunting and battle and the sort of activities that men in that natural division, I'm going to call it a natural division of labor that existed for many thousands of years with humans. There's a reason for it, obviously. Men did the fighting and the hunting for physical reasons. Women were back with the babies, having babies, being pregnant, nursing, taking care of small children. And that natural division of labor did have significant, and it began to have really significant cultural meaning, male here, female there. As we were saying before, it can vary from culture to culture. Now, do men have a spatial awareness in their brain that women do not necessarily have the same of? Do women have an emotional or social tendency for a sensitivity, say, to body language or facial expression because of that socialization? Is it part socialization? Is it part our brain? I don't know. But brain scientists tell me, at least, that yeah, and they don't like to say this a lot. What's really interesting is that it's not politically correct to talk about the physiological differences between, say, the male or the female brain, but they have identified them. And they've identified them as early as toddlers. After puberty, they really start, diverging, the brains of men and women. Obviously, those are irrelevant from a philosophical standpoint. Men and women are equally conceptual. They're the same mode of cognition, the same way of thinking. That's why we can talk and interact, have similar emotions. We're not two different species with two completely different ways of thinking at all. No, the philosophically significant kind of thinking we do is identical. What we're talking about here are tendencies. What we're talking about here are certain capacities maybe that are stronger in one or weaker in the other. and again, lying along across a spectrum, a continuum.
Indeed. So now we've talked about how objectivism, or we can't, I guess we can't speak for objectivism, but to us objectivists, this is a real condition, identifies something that's real. By the same token, male-female recognizes something that's real at a perceptual level of identification, which is the lowest level for us folks. You can point to it and say, there it is. We know that the movement itself is highly emotionalist in nature and anti-conceptual. They're throwing these anti-concepts out there in an attempt to destroy the concept of male-female and stuff. What could be the possible purpose of that? What's the long game for these folks who are ideological, intensely ideological about this issue?
Well, obviously, you're asking me to psychologize to a certain extent, and it will vary from person to person. But as objectivists, we know that kind of subjectivism does have certain motives, and they're not honest ones. They really aren't. They want to evade a physical fact, a physical reality, and substitute it with pure subjectivism. Subjectivism, for our listeners, is the idea that human consciousness controls reality, that our consciousness controls reality, and that's the motive here. The motive behind subjectivism is so that my whims take precedence over the hard facts, whatever those hard facts are. It is the excuse obviously used is one we've explained here, and it's not there's a real reason for it. Women were badly mistreated under the Anglo-American legal system, for example, for many centuries, in my view. It was unjust, unfair, based on primitive notions of what a woman was and what a man was. And so wanting to cut across those bad social ways we have of separating the sexes in various cultures, there are people on the left who want to, cut that all out. So they use that kind of as the good motive, right? The like you were pointing out, the constriction that the feminine mystique had on women before. So we can all kind of sympathize with it, but it's kind of like environmentalism, isn't it? Everyone likes beautiful trees and a clean environment. No one likes litter, but what it is, it's a package deal. The trans movement is package dealing, you see, all that stuff, look at the horrible ways in which we treated women before, ... Look at the horrible ways we treated gays before, ... Look at the horrible ways we treated just a tomboy girl or a slightly effeminate boy. I mean, we traumatize kids with words like fag or, it's really horrible. Okay. Yeah. I highly sympathize with all of those motives. And that's what sucks us in to the package deal of this subjectivism. And the motive behind all that is they want their whims to take precedence over facts.
And some of these folks, I think, are anti-capitalist and collectivistic in their orientation. And I think they use these flaws in our social system to create fissures and deep fissures that will undermine what they think is the essential problem, which is this patriarchal order, which they attribute to a capitalistic society. And they want to undermine that because they think it's the purveyor of all the evils that we have.
Go further. They are out against traditional masculine values in some sense. They don't. The whole concept of toxic masculinity is, don't get me wrong. Can dudes be toxic? Absolutely, they can. But the entire range of things that are associated with masculinity, physically acting out, being competitive, being physical, being aggressive, all of those can be virtuous things. I mean, in the right context, they're great virtues. Masculinity, those things that we associate with in the West with traditional masculinity, are virtuous things, are wonderful things. And yeah, capitalism is connected with it. Is competition part of capitalism? Absolutely. And so insofar as you, Mr. Woke Leftist, thinks that capitalism is all about all this aggressive competition, so macho, capitalism, as we've said many times on Ayn Rand Center UK podcasts, is as much about cooperation as it is about competition. Capitalism as such. Capitalism cannot be defined as the system of competition. But yeah, will it call for virtues that we traditionally call masculine? Sure. And do I suspect in the back of my mind that these people really have it out for masculinity and masculine virtues as such? Yeah, sometimes the mask slips completely and they'll just come out with it. Oh, how male of you. Oh, how competitive of you. Oh, how linear logical of you. No, dudes are dudes. And we do, if I were to make a general empirical assessment of my dude friends versus my female friends, yeah, my dude friends over here, they are linear, logical, aggressive, competitive, want to physically act out. That's different. And is that coming from their body chemistry? To some extent, I think it is. I think testosterone and various other chemicals are different with us dudes. And is that going to have a certain tendency? Yeah. But to list the masculine virtues and declare them all to be vices, which is what I think part of the motive is itself a kind of sexism, isn't it?
Indeed. Insidious too. Robert Nasir, another $5. Thank you, Robert. It's always good to have your support. I agree wholeheartedly and enthusiastically with the discussion and the approach being taken here. I mean, in an appropriately manly way. Catherine Cascio.
That's worth a fist bump, Robert.
If I'm pronouncing this right, Catherine, with $4.99. What about the influence of unbalanced hormones on people's brains? Why they may not feel like a male or female? Again, that's a scientific or medical question that we can't answer, but it's certainly true that these phenomenon exists, and it's worth discussing. We can't close the book and say the science is decided on it. It's not. Nor can we bleed this over into and use an ideology to perpetuate, emotionalism and irrationalism and the worship of a sort of a nihilistic attitude towards men and women that seems to be rampant out there. Like if for example, now how would you classify a biological male who wants to compete in he's transitioning, apparently, maybe on hormones, but post-puberty, so he's got all the physical attributes of a male, wants to compete in female sports? Would you create an entirely different category for them?
I certainly would not allow biological males to physically compete with biological females. It destroys women's athletics. I mean, why have the category women's sports at all? By having the category women's sports, we're recognizing the physical differences between boys and girls. That first level concept there, boy, girl, and it makes a big difference. Now, whether or not they should see, in most cases, and this is going to sound really sexist, in most cases, it really wouldn't matter if you let the female compete with the men. In fact, in a lot of sports, there's no problem with females entering the male competition. When males with tremendously more upper body strength and more dynamic strength compete with females, we know what the outcome is going to be. It's going to destroy female athletics. So either have your own trans category or have some category where the general category where the guys all compete for the strongest and the fastest and the it's not sexism at all to recognize those differences. It's not sexism for me to say that I could beat my wife in an arm wrestling match. That's not sexism. That's just a statement of a fact. And empirically, when you look at the outcomes in female sports, when you allow biological men to compete, it really spells the end of it. So I'm very much opposed to it. I'm very much opposed to surgically altering minors too. I don't care what the suffering, and I want to say it like that, just as compassionately as I possibly can. A teenager may be suffering tremendously, but until they reach an age of consent, legal consent, to permanently affect their own bodies, even is no. It's got to be in the hands of the parent. Can the parents look? I'm opposed to circumcision. I think circumcision of baby boys is child abuse. So if I take that position on circumcision, obviously I'm opposed to any kind of surgical alteration or chemical alteration of minors. When they reach adulthood, when they reach the age of consent, let's say over the age of 18, they can do with their body as they choose and what makes them feel comfortable with their body. Obviously, if someone wanted to come along and say cut off their healthy leg, and there are people like that, believe it or not. There are people in this world. They found a guy at a motel room in Mexico he was denied his doctor in America wouldn't amputate his healthy leg. So he went to Mexico, did it himself, and bled to death. Found dead in a Mexican motel room because he wanted to cut off his own leg. You'd identify that as a pathological condition. You'd identify and you'd say, yeah, he better be able to work with a doctor, or right. We should get him into therapy. We should get him into whatever the treatment that is appropriate. And again, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know what the appropriate treatment is, but whatever the appropriate treatment is, it should have to wait for adulthood.
And children who are experiencing, this kind of dysphoria too, are oftentimes going through a stage. There are a series of stages that they should be allowed to transition through, and the parent should guide them through that too, by adhering to perceptual reality and giving that child a chance to come around. I mean, I know when I was a kid, I put on my mom's high heels and walked around the house with them and played, and
it's so typical and so common a thing that you're right.
Nowadays, that would be looked on as possibly evidence of transitioning, and
we better get Mark we better get Mark a transition doctor. We better get him, people who encourage him in his transition. No, kids go through phases until the thing is done baking. Let's keep it in the oven, and until they reach the age of consent, they don't even have the right, in my view, to permanently affect their own bodies in this way, any more than they have a right to cut off their own leg.
That's an interesting concept, that they don't even have the right to do that, because the parents are their wards. They are taking care of the children, and in essence have that kind of command, and the child doesn't have the context yet to be able to make those kinds of choices. Unfortunately, a lot of the parents who surrender to this insanity are told by counselors that the other alternative is suicide. And so they're trying to avoid that horrible end in their child. They lack the context as well to know that maybe that's misinformation. Maybe that's something that shouldn't be said at this.
It's something. It's enough if they got it in my head, so that I asked my friend when he was alive, about that very thing. Was it so miserable that you would contemplate suicide? What he said is no. Flat out, no. I would never have committed suicide over the matter. I accept myself to that degree. I mean, my life is what's important to me. As I say, he was an objectivist, and had no qualms about saying I'm biologically female.
But that's why it's important for psychologists to differentiate between types of problems. I mean, it could be that people are being misdiagnosed who have depression or bipolar disorder or something else that is swinging their emotions in the direction of committing such a terrible act against themselves, self-harm. And that needs to be differentiated out. And of course, they feel alienated from themselves, from the world. And the trans movement seems to have given them a reason to a false sense of self and esteem that they're able to go on, grab onto and grip onto for life, when perhaps they should be looking in another direction for healing.
Exactly. How about we get to the point where we can say that the concept man can include the entire range of behavior men are capable of? How about we say concept woman includes all the range of behavior that women are capable of? It's not a psychological state being a man or a woman. It's really independent of it. Now, as we said earlier, there's a relationship. There could be a very intimate relationship between certain psychological states and our physicality as being male or female. But on the other hand, male or female is not about the psychological state. And the funny thing is people who oftentimes do transition and go through the sex change operation, gender reassignment surgery, they have higher incident rates of suicide and depression. and many of them regret it. We really don't have good science on this. To say that we have good science on transitioning from one gender to another, like a lot of these trans movement people assume almost religiously, is sheer nonsense. We really do not know. A lot of the questions on this topic have the answer, we do not yet know. And we have to be a little humble, it seems to me, in the face of that kind of cosmic ignorance of why people should even experience body dysphoria. I mean, we don't understand homosexuality. We don't understand transvestism. We don't understand. But what we are seeing today is an increase in people saying, I'm trans. Now, why should there have been such a sudden increase in people saying trans? Part of it could be, well, we're now socially, normalizing it. It's okay. And so more people are identifying. Or it could be that we're actually influencing young people. We see, and the statistics that we see now coming about is like teenage girls in groups, teenage girls in social groups, are more likely to follow the same path.
When you're feeling alienated from yourself and your body, and you finally find camaraderie with other people through this movement, that's an incentive to gravitate towards that movement.
Absolutely. It's funny. My friend, biologically female, but wants to be a he, feels right as he, is not comfortable except as a he, looked at the lesbian culture. No way. That's not for me. Not even close. I'm a dude. Well, what do you mean? I go through the list. I mean, we talked auto mechanics, we talked sports, it would be the same conversation that I had with my friend than I would with any of my biologically male friends. The same kind of psychological and cultural orientations. And it took me a while, even, as I say, to get my friend to open up. Beforehand, I didn't have the slightest clue. I was totally, when he told me, I was completely surprised.
Yeah. But we're not going to get to the bottom of this thing, as we should, provided it stays politicized as it is. As long as it's an ideology, the ideology is going to resist any change to the narrative, any change, including scientifically valid facts.
Boy, that's true.
So we have a Bradley for €23.99. Thank you, Bradley. Cultural norms exist. Some value harmony, others assertiveness. Sex is biologically binary, but some men are more feminine than culture norms. Vice versa for women. The conflict causes the dilemma, cultural second-handedness. Well, there's something to be said for that. I mean, there are people who sort of defy the norms or step outside what we consider the norms of masculine and feminine behavior, and that can be confusing to people and sort of gives ammunition to this ideological movement where they can point to those folks and say, see, it's not as clear-cut as you claim it is. What do you say to that?
You're almost as old as I am, Mark. I see a little gray in your beard. Perhaps you remember as I do. Oh, I'm sorry. The thought escaped my mind right there. The biological norm of what it is to be a dude. I'm sorry, I lost my thought.
I hate it when that happens. I'll take your mind off of it for a second. It'll probably come back. Kathleen for £2 says, evening, folks. Hey, Kathleen. Good to see you. Bonnie Bertrand for $5. Reason, it's amazing. Thanks for showing what it can do. Well, thanks, Bonnie. That's awful nice of you. So we were talking about gender roles and people who sort of slide along the spectrum in a way that
I know what I was going to use. This is a great example. When I was a kid, David Bowie hit I was entering my teenage period. What was I, 10 years old? David Bowie. Now, here is a popular performer in the Western world, one of the most popular singers of his time, of his generation. And yet he was constantly sort of reinventing himself and the image he projected. And some of those images were totally in the face of traditional masculine values. What is he? Is he sort of female? Is he gay? What's going on there? How is David Bowie presenting? I'll tell you the effect it had on me, because I was a David Bowie fan when I was a preteen and teenager. The effect it had on me was simply to tell me what it is to be a guy, what it is to be a dude has a lot of possibilities. There's a wide range of options for how I would present as a guy. And David Bowie didn't indicate to me, oh my goodness, that this guy is not a dude at all. He falls off the spectrum there, which some people, conservatives, social conservatives, cultural conservatives at the time, oh, what is David Bowie doing? See, he's blurring the line between male and female. He's No, what it did for me was to widen my view of what a man could be or what a woman could be. Quite the opposite. So all I can say is that science has not yet reached the point where we can identify with objective clarity. But there's always going to be also wiggle room. That is to say, with most of these features that we're going to have, you're never going to be able to say, "Oh, well, you're healthy because you don't cry at that movie." When that love scene happens, the chicks over there I'll use the sexist term chicks. The chicks over there are crying at the movie. And then there's a couple of guys there who are also crying in the movie. The other guys over here aren't crying at the movie. What? Is there any really significance to that?
No, well, I mean, one of the things, I already told you one of the things my wife loves about me is my protectiveness, my ability to protect her, but also she loves the fact that I cry at rom-coms. I just bawl like a baby. And I'm sentimental. I love romantic stories. And in fact, watching episode 3 of The Last of Us, I'm giving a plug to The Last of Us. There was a love story between two people on that show that just blew my mind and had me bawling the whole time. So that's that spectrum. That's that thing I thought you said was quite brilliant about maleness or femaleness encompassing a wide array of behaviors and presentations, and letting that, still calling them male, still calling them female, but understanding that they present in lots of different ways. I think that's a much healthier way to look at the world than attempting to label every single emotion you have and give it primacy over reality.
I wouldn't want to pit some characteristic against my sexual physical nature. I mean, that's a sure setup for encouraging confusion, encouraging people to get into this ambiguous state, rather than say, no, being a dude can include all that. Be comfortable with that as a dude. That seems to me a much healthier way, one that's consistent with people being comfortable in their own body.
Yeah, so maleness, it has John Wayne and David Bowie, and they both live in the same universe, and they could be comfortable. They could be comfortable for enlightened folks. So, folks, upcoming shows at 7 p.m. UK time: the Fountainhead Book Club with Shoshana Milgram for Ayn Rand Center UK members. The session will also be live streamed for YouTube members. Link in the chat, folks. That's good, because there's been a little vigorous discussion online about Dominique. I was sort of an enemy of Dominique. I have to say, I was not a fan, have not been a fan for years. And then Don Watson, of course, said something that sort of blew me out of the water. And I'm beginning to think a little bit differently about old Dominique. I went from I'm kicking her out of the bed to maybe I'll take her.
Well, you do have to wonder. I mean, what? Spoiler alert! But what the heck is our hero Howard Rourke doing, falling in love with a woman who's out to destroy him? I mean, it's hard to understand this lady's psychology. I have to say, it was one of the challenges for me to even wrap my head around who this character Dominique was. She's not an easy character to understand at all.
She's not, and one of my adopted kids, I hope she's watching today, is reading it, and she's not very impressed by Dominique. And I've been encouraging her not to be too impressed by Dominique, but now I say, Kiana, perhaps Dominique is protecting Rourke, not trying to destroy him. If you think about that, if you have that little idea in your mind, it might make some of her crazy actions a little bit more palatable.
Right.
That turned things around for me. So now I think I might go back and reread The Fountainhead with that in mind and see how I feel about Dominique. James, it's been great as usual. You enlightened me. You said things in such a way to make things even more clear for me. And I really appreciate knowing you and doing these shows with you. I hope we do tons of them together.
I do too.
All right, guys. This is Daily Objective. You've seen it. We'll see you again tomorrow, I guess. And peace.